The morning mist hung low over London as James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for what would be his final time as a Queen's Guard. At 28 years old, he had spent 6 years standing motionless outside Buckingham Palace, becoming as much a part of the landscape as the ornate gates themselves. But today everything would change. The year 2026 had brought many changes to the monarchy. King Charles III had been on the throne for nearly 4 years now, and with his reign came new traditions, new protocols, and new challenges. The changing of the guard ceremony, a tradition dating back over 350 years, was about to undergo its most significant transformation in modern history. James stood in the Wellington Barracks, just a short march from Buckingham Palace. Around him, his fellow guardsmen prepared for the 11:30 a.m. ceremony. The familiar sounds of boots clicking against polished floors, the rustle of bearskin hats being adjusted, and the quiet murmur of last-minute instructions filled the air. These sounds had become the soundtrack of his life. "Mitchell," Sergeant Major Thompson's voice cut through the morning preparation. "Her Majesty wishes to speak with you before the ceremony." James felt his heart skip. In 6 years of service, he had never been personally summoned by royalty. The other guards looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and envy as he followed the sergeant major through the corridors of the barracks. The walk to Buckingham Palace felt longer than usual. James had made this journey thousands of times, but today his legs felt heavy with anticipation. The palace loomed ahead, its familiar facade seeming somehow different in the morning light. Tourists were already gathering behind the barriers, cameras ready to capture the ceremony that had fascinated visitors for generations. Inside the palace, James was led through corridors he had only glimpsed from his post outside. The walls were lined with portraits of monarchs past, their painted eyes seeming to follow his every step. Crystal chandeliers caught the morning sun streaming through tall windows, casting rainbow patterns across marble floors that had been walked upon by centuries of royalty. Queen Camilla waited in a small sitting room overlooking the palace gardens. She was dressed simply in a navy blue dress, her silver hair perfectly styled. Despite her casual appearance, her presence commanded immediate respect. James had seen her countless times from his post, but being in the same room felt surreal. "Please sit down, James," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "I hope you don't mind me using your first name. After 6 years of watching you guard my home, I feel we're well acquainted." James sat carefully on the edge of an antique chair, his back straight as a board. Years of military training made relaxation impossible, even in the presence of royalty who had just invited informality. "Your Majesty," he began, but she raised a gentle hand to stop him. "I wanted to speak with you personally because today marks the end of an era," she continued, "not just for you but for the Guard itself. The King and I have been discussing changes to the ceremony, changes that will honor tradition while embracing the future." James listened intently as she explained the royal family's vision for modernizing the changing of the Guard. Technology would play a larger role, with enhanced security measures invisible to the public eye. The ceremony would incorporate elements that reflected Britain's diverse modern population while maintaining the pageantry that made it world famous. "We've chosen you to be part of this transition," the Queen said. "Your record of service has been exemplary, and your understanding of both tradition and progress makes you perfect for what we have in mind." The Queen stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the gathering crowd below. James could see tourists from every corner of the world, their faces bright with anticipation. Children pressed against the barriers while parents checked their cameras, all waiting for a ceremony that had barely changed since Queen Victoria's time. "The world is changing, James," she said softly. "The monarchy must change with it, but we must never lose sight of what makes us special. The changing of the Guard isn't just a ceremony. It's a living piece of history that connects us to our past while carrying us into the future." James felt the weight of her words. He had always seen his role as purely ceremonial, standing still and looking impressive for tourists. But now he understood that he was part of something much larger, a tradition that helped define Britain's identity on the world stage. "What would you like me to do, Your Majesty?" he asked, his voice steady despite the excitement building inside him. The Queen turned back to him with a smile. "Today you'll perform the ceremony as you always have, but starting tomorrow, You'll begin training for your new role as Ceremonial Innovation Coordinator. You'll work with tradition experts, security specialists, and cultural advisors to help us reshape this ceremony for the next generation. James felt overwhelmed by the honor being bestowed upon him. From a working-class family in Yorkshire, he had never imagined that his military service would lead to such an opportunity. The boy who had dreamed of wearing the red tunic and bearskin hat was now being asked to help shape the future of the very tradition he had grown to love. "The tourists below don't know it yet," the Queen said, "but they're about to witness history. Today's ceremony will be the last of the old era and the first glimpse of what's to come." As James made his way back to the barracks, his mind raced with possibilities. The familiar weight of his bearskin hat felt different now, charged with new meaning. He wasn't just a guard anymore. He was a bridge between past and future, tradition and innovation. The other guards noticed the change in his demeanor immediately. There was something different about the way he carried himself, a new sense of purpose that went beyond the rigid posture required by protocol. Word spread quickly through the ranks that something special was about to happen. Outside, the crowd continued to grow. Tour guides pointed out the best viewing spots while street vendors sold miniature guards and royal memorabilia. Nobody in the gathering crowd could have imagined that they were about to witness the beginning of a transformation that would reshape one of Britain's most beloved traditions forever. The sound of military bands tuning their instruments echoed across the courtyard as 11 o'clock approached. James stood with his regiment, feeling the familiar pre-ceremony tension that had become second nature over the years. But today, that tension carried an extra edge of anticipation that made his palms sweat inside his white gloves. Among the crowd gathering behind the golden gates, Sarah Chen adjusted her professional camera lens. A photojournalist for the London Times, she had covered the changing of the guard ceremony dozens of times, but her editor had insisted she attend today's event. There were whispers in royal circles that something significant was about to happen, though nobody seemed to know exactly what. Sarah had arrived 2 hours early to secure the perfect position. Years of covering royal events had taught her that the best shots came from unexpected angles, moments when the rigid formality cracked just enough to reveal the humanity beneath the ceremony. Today she sensed there would be plenty of such moments. The tourists around her represented a global community united by curiosity about British tradition. An elderly Japanese couple consulted their guidebook, carefully pronouncing English phrases they had practiced for this moment. A family from Nigeria held up their young daughter so she could see over the crowd, her eyes wide with wonder at the spectacle unfolding before her. Behind the palace walls, preparations moved with clockwork precision. The Old Guard, James's regiment, conducted their final equipment checks. Every button gleamed, every boot shone like a mirror, every pleat in their uniforms fell perfectly straight. The guards had elevated military presentation to an art form, and today that art would be tested like never before. Sergeant Major Thompson moved between the ranks, his experienced eye catching the smallest imperfection. A slightly crooked badge here, a scuffed boot there, nothing escaped his attention. But when he reached James, he paused and placed a firm hand on the young guard's shoulder. "Whatever happens out there today, Mitchell, remember that you represent centuries of tradition," Thompson said quietly. "But don't be afraid to help that tradition grow." At exactly 11:15 a.m., the regimental band struck up the first notes of the march. The sound sent a familiar thrill through James's body, the same electric feeling he had experienced on his very first day of duty. The music seemed to awaken something ancient and powerful, connecting him to every guard who had performed this ceremony before him. The march from Wellington Barracks to Buckingham Palace had been refined over decades to create maximum visual impact. The guards moved in perfect synchronization, their bearskin hats swaying with each step, their red tunics creating a river of color flowing through London streets. Tourists lined the route, phones and cameras capturing every moment of the spectacle. Sarah Chen moved with the crowd, her trained photographer's eye noting details that others might miss. There was something different about today's procession. The guards seemed more alert, more focused than usual. Their formation was tighter, their movements more precise. Something was definitely happening. As the old guard approached Buckingham Palace, the new guard emerged from their position. These fresh soldiers would take over the responsibility of protecting the royal residence, continuing a tradition that had never been broken, not even during the darkest days of World War II. The ceremony itself followed ancient protocols that seemed almost mystical in their precision. Commands were shouted in voices that could be heard across the vast courtyard. Keys were exchanged between officers with movements that had been choreographed centuries ago. Every gesture carried weight. Every word spoken had been spoken by countless guards before. But today, as James took his position for the formal exchange, he noticed something that had never been there before. Hidden among the traditional elements of the ceremony were subtle new additions. Security personnel in civilian clothes moved through the crowd with casual efficiency. Small technological devices, nearly invisible to the untrained eye, had been integrated into the palace's architecture. The Queen Mother had been right. Change was coming. But it was being woven seamlessly into the fabric of tradition. The tourists watching had no idea they were witnessing history being made. To them, this was simply another performance of a timeless ceremony. Children pointed excitedly at the guards' tall black hats, while their parents tried to explain the significance of what they were seeing. The ceremony had always been about more than just changing shifts. It was a window into British culture, a living museum that brought history to life. Sarah Chen's camera clicked rapidly as she captured the moment when the old and new guards stood face to face. Through her lens, she could see something special in the lead guard's eyes. James, though she didn't know his name yet. There was an intensity there that went beyond normal ceremonial duty, a sense that this soldier understood the weight of the moment in ways that went deeper than tradition. The formal exchange of keys happened exactly as it had thousands of times before. The officer of the old guard approached the officer of the new guard with movements that were both martial and ceremonial. Words were spoken that dated back to an era when such exchanges meant the difference between security and invasion, between order and chaos. "The keys to Her Majesty's palace," the old guard officer announced, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "I accept them in Her Majesty's name," came the traditional reply. But as the keys changed hands, James caught a glimpse of something that broke with all tradition. King Charles III himself appeared briefly at a palace window, offering what appeared to be a subtle nod of acknowledgement, specifically in James's direction. It was a moment so brief that most observers missed it entirely, but James felt its significance like a jolt of electricity. The ceremony continued with military precision, but James's awareness had expanded beyond the immediate requirements of his role. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, not as a burden but as a responsibility he was honored to carry. Every step he took, every movement he made was part of a chain of tradition stretching back through centuries of British history. As the new guard took their positions and the old guard prepared to march away, James allowed himself one last look at the palace he had protected for 6 years. Tomorrow he would return not as a guard but as someone tasked with helping this ancient ceremony evolve for a new generation. The thought both excited and terrified him. The crowd began to disperse as the ceremony concluded, tourists chattering excitedly about what they had witnessed. Most would never realize that they had seen not just another changing of the guard, but the last performance of an era that was about to transform forever. They would remember the pageantry, the precision, and the majesty, but they would have no idea that history itself had just shifted beneath their feet. 3 weeks after the ceremony that changed everything, James found himself in a part of Buckingham Palace he had never seen before. The Royal Innovation Center was a modern facility hidden behind centuries-old walls, where tradition met cutting-edge technology in ways that would have seemed impossible just a generation ago. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, the palace's newly appointed Director of Ceremonial Evolution, greeted James with a warm smile and a firm handshake. A former Oxford professor specializing in cultural anthropology, she had been tasked by King Charles III with modernizing royal ceremonies without destroying their essential character. "Welcome to the future, James," she said, leading him through corridors lined with both ancient tapestries and state-of-the-art computer monitors. "Your job will be to help us build a bridge between what was and what needs to be." The briefing room where James would spend much of the next few months looked like something from a science fiction film. Multiple screens displayed real-time data about security threats, crowd dynamics, and weather conditions. Digital maps showed tourist flow patterns around Buckingham Palace, while sophisticated algorithms analyzed everything from social media sentiment to economic impact. The changing of the guard ceremony attracts over 15 million visitors annually, Dr. Hartwell explained, pulling up statistics that made James's head spin. Those visitors contribute over £2 billion to the British economy. But more importantly, the ceremony is one of our most powerful tools for cultural diplomacy. James struggled to process the numbers. He had always known the ceremony was popular, but he had never imagined its global reach or economic significance. Standing guard had felt like a simple job with clear responsibilities. This new role seemed to involve considerations he had never dreamed of. The challenge, Dr. Hartwell continued, is maintaining the ceremony's authentic character while adapting to modern realities. Security concerns, climate change, technological possibilities, and changing social expectations all require us to evolve. She led James to a wall covered with photographs from changing of the guard ceremonies throughout history. Black and white images from the Victorian era showed guards in slightly different uniforms standing before crowds dressed in formal attire. Color photographs from the 1960s captured tourists in bright clothing, many holding the first generation of portable cameras. Look at how the crowds have changed, Dr. Hartwell pointed out. Today's tourists are more diverse, more connected, and more demanding of authentic experiences. They want to participate, not just observe. They want to understand the meaning behind the spectacle. James studied recent photographs showing crowds filled with people from every continent, speaking dozens of languages, recording everything with smartphones that would have seemed magical to the guards of previous generations. He began to understand the complexity of the challenge before him. But how do we change something that's supposed to be timeless? James asked. Dr. Hartwell smiled at the question. That's exactly the right concern to have. The answer is that we enhance rather than replace. We use technology to tell the story better, to make the ceremony more accessible and meaningful, while preserving every element that makes it special. She showed James prototype devices that looked like ordinary tourist information kiosks, but contained sophisticated translation software, historical databases, and interactive educational content. Visitors would be able to understand the ceremony's significance in their own language, learn about the history of the guards, and even access augmented reality features that would bring centuries of tradition to life. Imagine a family from South Korea standing in the crowd, Dr. Hartwell explained. With our new system, they'll be able to point their phone at a guard and instantly see information about his regiment's history, understand the significance of his uniform, and learn about famous battles their ancestors fought in. The ceremony becomes educational as well as spectacular. James was fascinated but also worried. Won't all that technology distract from the ceremony itself? That's where your expertise becomes crucial, Dr. Hartwell replied. You understand the ceremony from the inside. You know what elements are essential and what details matter most. Your job is to ensure that everything we add enhances rather than detracts from the core experience. Over the following weeks, James threw himself into his new role with the same dedication he had brought to standing guard. He spent hours studying historical documents, learning about the ceremony's evolution over the centuries. He discovered that what seemed like an unchanging tradition had actually adapted continuously, incorporating new military technologies, responding to political changes, and evolving with the times. The bearskin hats, for example, had been adopted after British forces defeated Napoleon's Imperial Guard at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. The red tunics had practical origins, in an era when soldiers needed to be easily identified on smoky battlefields. Even the timing of the ceremony had changed multiple times to accommodate everything from royal schedules to tourist seasons. Nothing about this ceremony is accidentally traditional, James realized during one late-night research session. Every element exists for a reason, and those reasons have evolved as the world has changed. His insights proved invaluable to Dr. Hartwell's team. When technology specialists proposed adding LED displays to the guards' uniforms, James explained why that would undermine the ceremony's dignity. When historians suggested recreating medieval elements that had been discontinued, James pointed out practical problems that would make implementation impossible. The breakthrough came when James suggested focusing on the stories behind the ceremony rather than changing the ceremony itself. People are fascinated by the guards who stand so still, he explained. They wonder what we're thinking, what our lives are like, how we endure hours without moving. What if we could share those stories without breaking the magic? This insight led to the development of the Guardian Chronicles project. Using advanced audio technology and carefully positioned speakers, the team created an immersive soundscape that would tell the stories of individual guards throughout history. Visitors could hear the thoughts and experiences of Victorian-era soldiers, World War II veterans, and modern guards like James himself. The technology was sophisticated, but completely invisible. Tourists would experience the enhanced ceremony without seeing any devices or equipment that might break the historical illusion. The guards themselves would perform exactly as they always had, but the audience would gain unprecedented insight into their experiences. "It's brilliant," Dr. Hartwell said when James presented the concept. "We're not changing the ceremony at all. We're simply giving people a deeper understanding of what they're already seeing." James felt a surge of pride at her approval, but also a growing sense of responsibility. He was helping to shape an experience that would be shared by millions of people from around the world. Every decision he made would influence how future generations understood and connected with British culture. As the project developed, James found himself becoming a bridge between different worlds. He translated the concerns of active guards for the technology team, explained security requirements to the historians, and helped the marketing department understand what elements of the ceremony would resonate most powerfully with international audiences. The work was challenging, but deeply satisfying. For the first time in his military career, James felt like he was contributing to something larger than himself, while still honoring the traditions he had sworn to protect. 6 months into the transformation project, James found himself standing in the same courtyard where he had spent countless hours on guard duty. But now he saw everything differently. The ancient stones beneath his feet held sensors that could detect crowd density and movement patterns. The ornate lampposts had been fitted with nearly invisible speakers for the Guardian Chronicles audio system. Technology and tradition had merged so seamlessly that even he sometimes forgot about the innovations hidden in plain sight. Today marked the first full test of the new enhanced ceremony. A carefully selected group of international tourists had been invited to experience the preview, their reactions monitored by behavioral psychologists and cultural experts. James watched nervously from the palace steps as families from 12 different countries took their positions behind the barriers. Among the test audience was the Okafor family from Lagos, Nigeria. 8-year-old Kioma pressed against the golden railings with barely contained excitement, while her parents, Dr. and Mrs. Okafor, consulted the new digital guide that had been loaded onto their smartphones. The technology seamlessly detected their preferred language and began providing context about the ceremony they were about to witness. "The guards you will see today belong to regiments with over 350 years of history," the audio guide explained in fluent Igbo. "Each soldier has trained for months to achieve the perfect stillness and precision you will observe." Meanwhile, the Yamamoto family from Tokyo activated the augmented reality features on their devices. As they pointed their phones toward the palace, historical images overlaid the current scene, showing how the ceremony had looked during different periods of British history. 12-year-old Kenji gasped with delight as he saw Victorian-era guards materializing on his screen, in the exact positions where today's soldiers would soon stand. James had spent weeks fine-tuning these features, ensuring they enhanced rather than distracted from the live experience. The technology activated only when users chose to engage with it, leaving those who preferred the traditional ceremony completely undisturbed. The Swedish delegation, a group of cultural anthropologists led by Professor Erik Lindqvist, represented the academic community's interest in the project. They had been skeptical about mixing technology with traditional ceremony, but James's careful approach had begun to win them over. "The integrity of the original ceremony remains completely intact," Professor Lindqvist noted to his colleagues. "The enhancements provide educational value without commercializing or trivializing the tradition." As 11:30 a.m. approached, James activated the communication system that connected him to Dr. Hartwell and the rest of the observation team positioned throughout the palace. Multiple cameras and sensors would record every aspect of the test ceremony, from crowd reaction to guard performance, generating data that would guide final adjustments to the system. "All stations ready?" Dr. Hartwell's voice crackled through James's earpiece. "Guards are in position. Technology systems are online and our international observers are prepared. This is history in the making. The familiar sound of military boots on cobblestones announced the arrival of the old guard. James felt his pulse quicken as he watched soldiers who had once been his colleagues perform the same routine he had executed hundreds of times. But now he saw the ceremony through the eyes of the diverse audience experiencing it for the first time. The Patel family from Mumbai activated the historical timeline feature, which allowed them to understand how the ceremony connected to Britain's colonial history and its complex relationship with India. The system presented this sensitive information carefully, acknowledging difficult truths while celebrating shared heritage and cultural evolution. The Guards' red uniforms originally helped British soldiers identify each other in the chaos of 18th century battlefields, the guide explained to teenage Priya Patel. Today, these same uniforms represent a commitment to peaceful tradition and cultural continuity. As the new guard emerged from the palace, the Guardian Chronicles audio system activated for the first time with a live audience. Carefully positioned speakers created an intimate soundscape that seemed to emanate from the guards themselves, sharing thoughts and experiences without breaking the ceremonial silence. "I can feel the weight of centuries in this moment," came the voice of a Victorian-era guard, speaking words that James had helped craft based on historical letters and diaries. "Every step I take connects me to every soldier who has stood in this place before me." The effect on the audience was immediate and powerful. Children stopped fidgeting and listened intently. Adults put away their phones and focused completely on the ceremony unfolding before them. The technology had succeeded in deepening engagement rather than creating distraction. Young Chioma Okafor turned to her father with wide eyes. "Papa, can the soldier really be thinking those thoughts?" Dr. Okafor smiled and knelt beside his daughter. "The technology is helping us understand what guards throughout history have felt during this ceremony. It's like reading the diary of someone who lived long ago." The formal exchange of keys proceeded exactly as it had for centuries. But now the audience understood the historical significance of every gesture. The Guardian Chronicles provided context about the symbolism of keys in medieval society, the evolution of military command structures, and the personal stories of guards who had participated in this ritual during times of war and peace. Professor Lindqvist found himself unexpectedly moved by the experience. "This is not about replacing tradition with technology," he whispered to his research assistant. "It's about using technology to help people connect more deeply with tradition." James monitored the real-time feedback streaming across his tablet. Engagement levels were higher than any previous ceremony on record. Emotional response indicators showed sustained attention and positive reaction across all demographic groups. Most importantly, the guards themselves reported no disruption to their ability to perform their duties. The ceremony concluded with the traditional march of the Old Guard back to Wellington Barracks. As the last notes of the military band faded away, the test audience lingered in the courtyard, many continuing to explore the historical information available through their devices. The Yamamoto family spent an additional 30 minutes using the augmented reality system to explore different historical periods. Kenji was particularly fascinated by the World War II era, when women had briefly served in guard roles due to wartime necessity. "I never knew the ceremony had evolved so much over time," Mrs. Yamamoto commented to the cultural liaison officer conducting exit interviews. "Understanding the history makes it feel more meaningful, not less." Similar responses came from test participants representing every age group and cultural background. The technology had succeeded in making an ancient ceremony more accessible to modern global audiences without diminishing its dignity or authenticity. Dr. Hartwell joined James in the courtyard as the last visitors departed. "The data is extraordinary," she said, consulting her preliminary analysis. "We've achieved something I wasn't sure was possible. We've enhanced tradition without changing it." James felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he watched the empty courtyard return to its peaceful state. The ceremony that had shaped his military career was now poised to connect with new generations in ways that honored both its past and its future. "What happens next?" he asked. "Next we prepare for the global launch," Dr. Hartwell replied. "In 3 months, this enhanced ceremony will be experienced by millions of visitors from around the world." "You've helped create something truly special, James. a bridge between past and future that strengthens rather than replaces our most cherished traditions. The morning of the global launch dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight casting golden shadows across Buckingham Palace's courtyard. James arrived at 6 a.m. to conduct final system checks, his breath visible in the cool air as he moved between the concealed technology stations that would soon enhance the ceremony for visitors. From around the world, word had spread through social media and travel networks that something special was happening at the changing of the guard. International news crews had positioned themselves strategically around the palace, and the usual crowd of tourists had swelled to nearly 3 times its normal size. People had traveled from 6 continents to witness what many were calling the future of cultural tourism. Sarah Chen, the photojournalist who had unknowingly captured the last traditional ceremony 9 months earlier, had returned with a team from the London Times. She was one of the few media representatives who understood the full significance of what was about to unfold. 9 months ago, I photographed what I thought was just another ceremony, she explained to her camera operator as they set up their equipment. Today I'm documenting how technology can preserve tradition instead of destroying it. Among the early arrivals was a group of secondary school students from the Tower Hamlets Academy, one of London's most diverse schools. Their history teacher, Ms. Aisha Khan, had brought them as part of a project exploring how British cultural institutions could remain relevant in an increasingly global society. I want you to pay attention not just to what you see, but to how the ceremony makes you feel, she instructed her students. Think about what this tradition means in today's world. 16-year-old Marcus Williams, whose family had immigrated from Jamaica 3 generations earlier, activated the new cultural perspective feature on his smartphone. The system had been designed to acknowledge the complex relationship between British traditions and the Commonwealth countries they once ruled. The ceremonial elements you see today evolved during Britain's imperial period, the audio guide explained sensitively. Modern Britain recognizes both the pride and the pain connected to this history, working to preserve cultural heritage while acknowledging its complicated past. The technology provided multiple narrative frameworks, allowing visitors to engage with the ceremony through lenses that reflected their own cultural backgrounds and historical experiences. A visitor from India could explore the ceremony's connection to colonial history, while someone from Scotland might focus on the role of Highland regiments in British military tradition. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, representing UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage Program, moved through the crowd with a team of international observers. She had come to evaluate whether the enhanced ceremony could serve as a model for preserving cultural traditions around the world. What we're seeing here could revolutionize how we approach cultural preservation, she noted to her colleagues. Instead of freezing traditions in time, this approach allows them to remain living, breathing practices that speak to new generations. As the ceremony time approached, James took his position in the palace's command center, surrounded by monitors showing real-time data from sensors throughout the area. Crowd density maps revealed the optimal distribution of visitors. Audio quality indicators confirmed that the Guardian Chronicles system was functioning perfectly. Security feeds showed that all safety protocols were in place. All systems green, he reported to Dr. Hartwell, who was coordinating with royal protocol officers to ensure that every aspect of the ceremony met the royal family's exacting standards. The arrival of the Old Guard triggered the first activation of the enhanced audio system. As the soldiers marched in perfect formation, visitors heard the thoughts and experiences of guards throughout history, each voice carefully selected to represent different eras and perspectives. I joined the guards to serve my country, came the voice of a World War I veteran, based on recorded interviews from the Imperial War Museum archives. I never expected that standing still could require so much courage. The effect rippled through the international crowd. Japanese tourists who had struggled with language barriers found themselves emotionally connected to the ceremony through universal themes of duty, sacrifice, and tradition. A group of German exchange students discovered unexpected parallels between British ceremonial traditions and their own cultural heritage. The formal ceremony proceeded with absolute precision, but now the audience understood the meaning behind every movement. When the officer of the Old Guard presented his sword in salute, the audio system explained the medieval origins of the gesture. When keys changed hands, Visitors learned about the symbolic transfer of responsibility that connected modern ceremony to ancient concepts of trust and duty. Young Fatima al-Rashid, visiting from Dubai with her family, was particularly fascinated by the role of horses in British ceremonial tradition. The augmented reality system allowed her to see historical images of mounted guards while learning about the care and training that went into maintaining the ceremonial horses. "The horses are as much a part of the tradition as the soldiers," she whispered to her mother in Arabic, unaware that the system was simultaneously providing the same information in over 40 languages to visitors throughout the crowd. The most powerful moment came during the formal inspection of the guard. As the commanding officer walked the line of motionless soldiers, the Guardian Chronicles shared the inner experience of maintaining perfect stillness under intense scrutiny. "Every muscle in my body wants to move," came the voice of a contemporary guard, "but discipline and pride keep me steady. I am part of something larger than myself." Marcus Williams found tears in his eyes as he listened. Despite his initial skepticism about British traditions, he was beginning to understand how the ceremony represented universal human values of dedication, discipline, and service. The ceremony concluded to spontaneous applause from the crowd, an unusual response that demonstrated the deeper emotional connection the enhanced experience had created. Visitors lingered in the courtyard, many continuing to explore the historical content available through their devices. Dr. Rodriguez approached James as the crowd began to disperse. "This is remarkable," she said. "You've managed to make an ancient ceremony speak directly to modern global audiences without changing a single element of the original tradition." The real-time feedback data streaming across James's monitors confirmed her observation. Engagement levels had reached unprecedented heights. Educational impact assessments showed that visitors were leaving with significantly deeper understanding of British history and culture. Most importantly, respect for the tradition itself had increased rather than diminished. International media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. The BBC's royal correspondent described it as a masterclass in cultural evolution. CNN's travel section called it the future of heritage tourism. Even traditionally skeptical publications praised the project's respectful approach to tradition. But the most meaningful feedback came from the guards themselves. Captain David Morrison, who had led the ceremony, reported that the enhanced audio experience had actually helped him feel more connected to his role. Hearing the thoughts of guards from previous generations reminded me that I'm part of a continuous chain of service, he told James during the post-ceremony debrief. "It didn't distract from my duties, it enhanced them." As the sun set over London, James stood once again in the courtyard where his military career had begun. The ancient stones seemed to pulse with the energy of the day's success. He had helped create something unprecedented, a bridge between past and future that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The enhanced changing of the guard ceremony was no longer just a tourist attraction or a piece of historical pageantry. It had become a living laboratory for cultural preservation, a model that could inspire similar projects around the world. Most importantly, it had proven that technology could serve tradition rather than replace it, creating deeper connections between people and their shared human heritage. 1 year after the global launch, James stood before an audience of cultural ministers and heritage officials from 37 countries. The International Conference on Cultural Innovation had convened in London specifically to study the success of the enhanced changing of the guard ceremony, which had become a model for preserving traditions in the digital age. The statistics James presented were staggering. Tourist satisfaction rates had increased by 43%. Educational impact assessments showed that visitors now left with significantly deeper understanding of British history and values. Most remarkably, the ceremony had attracted entirely new demographics, including young people who had previously shown little interest in traditional cultural experiences. The key insight, James explained to the international delegates, was recognizing that tradition and innovation are not opponents. They can be partners in creating experiences that honor the past while speaking to the present. In the audience, Professor Akiko Tanaka from Kyoto University took careful notes. She was leading a project to enhance traditional Japanese tea ceremonies for international visitors, and James's approach offered a roadmap for her own efforts. Beside her, Dr. Kwame Asante from Ghana's Ministry of Culture considered how similar techniques might preserve and share traditional Ashanti ceremonial practices. The success had not come without challenges. During the early months following the launch, James had faced criticism from traditionalists who worried that any technological enhancement would cheapen the ceremony's dignity. Conservative members of Parliament had questioned whether the monarchy should embrace such innovations. The turning point had come when Prince William himself participated in an enhanced ceremony during a state visit from the President of South Korea. The technology had seamlessly provided Korean language context about the ceremony's significance, creating a powerful moment of cultural diplomacy that strengthened international relations. His Royal Highness was initially skeptical, James admitted to the conference audience. But when he saw how the technology helped foreign dignitaries understand and appreciate British traditions, he became one of our strongest supporters. The Prince's endorsement had opened doors throughout the Commonwealth. Australia had implemented similar enhancements for the Sydney Harbour Bridge ceremonies. Canada was developing enhanced experiences for the Parliament, hill changing of the Guard. New Zealand had begun work on making traditional Maori cultural performances more accessible to international visitors. Sarah Chen, now covering the conference for multiple international publications, reflected on the journey she had documented over the past year. Her photograph from the last traditional ceremony had become iconic, symbolizing the moment when heritage preservation entered the digital age. "What strikes me most," she told James during a break between conference sessions, "is how the enhanced ceremony feels more authentic than the original, not less. People connect with traditions more deeply when they understand their meaning." The data supported her observation. Exit surveys consistently showed that visitors to the enhanced ceremony reported feeling more respectful toward British culture and more interested in learning about their own cultural traditions. The technology had created a bridge not just between past and present, but between different cultures seeking to understand each other. Dr. Hartwell had been promoted to Director of Global Cultural Innovation, advising governments and institutions worldwide on implementing similar projects. She had traveled to Egypt to help enhance visitor experiences at ancient monuments, to Peru to work on Machu Picchu preservation efforts, and to India to develop technology for heritage sites throughout the subcontinent. "What we learned at Buckingham Palace applies everywhere," she explained to conference attendees. "People hunger for authentic connection with history and culture. Technology can either create barriers or remove them. The choice is ours." The conference's most moving presentation came from Amara Ose, a teacher from a London primary school in Brixton. She described bringing her students, many from immigrant families, to experience the enhanced ceremony. "Before, my students saw the guards as symbols of a culture that didn't include them," she explained. "The enhanced ceremony helped them understand that British culture is something they can participate in and contribute to, not just observe from the outside." Her student surveys revealed that exposure to the enhanced ceremony had increased their sense of belonging in British society while strengthening pride in their own cultural heritage. The technology had somehow made both British traditions and immigrant cultures feel more valuable and worthy of preservation. The economic impact had been equally impressive. Tourism revenue from the ceremony had increased by 67%, but more importantly, visitors were staying longer in London and exploring other cultural attractions. The enhanced ceremony had become a gateway to deeper cultural engagement rather than a standalone tourist experience. James had been invited to consult on similar projects around the world. He had helped design enhanced experiences for the Vatican's Swiss Guard ceremonies, advised on technology integration for Japan's Imperial Palace, and worked with the Kremlin on preserving Russian ceremonial traditions. Each project had taught him new lessons about the delicate balance between innovation and preservation. The most unexpected development had been the ceremony's impact on recruitment for the British military. Young people who experienced the enhanced ceremony were significantly more likely to consider military service, drawn by a deeper understanding of the values and traditions represented by the Guards. "We're not just preserving culture," noted General Patricia Hayes, the Army's Director of Recruitment. "We're inspiring a new generation to become part of that culture." The conference concluded with the London Declaration on Cultural Innovation, a commitment by participating nations to share best practices and collaborate on heritage preservation projects. James was named as the first director of the International Cultural Innovation Network, a role that would take him around the world helping others achieve what had been accomplished at Buckingham Palace. As delegates departed to return to their home countries, many carried with them detailed plans for their own cultural enhancement projects. The principles developed for the changing of the guard ceremony would soon be applied to traditional dances in Indonesia, historical reenactments in the United States, and ancient festivals throughout Africa. But perhaps the most significant outcome was less tangible. The project had demonstrated that cultural traditions could evolve and strengthen, rather than simply survive. The enhanced ceremony had not preserved the changing of the guard like a museum piece. It had helped it grow into something more powerful and meaningful than ever before. James stood once again in the Buckingham Palace courtyard as evening fell over London. The enhanced ceremony continued to attract visitors from around the world, but now it also served as inspiration for cultural preservation efforts across 6 continents. What had begun as a single project had become a global movement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. A delegation from UNESCO was arriving to discuss expanding the project to World Heritage sites throughout Europe. The royal family was considering similar enhancements for other ceremonial events. Technology companies were requesting partnerships to develop even more sophisticated cultural experiences. But tonight, James simply watched the last tourist of the day taking photographs and sharing their experiences with friends around the world. Each visitor carried with them not just memories of a spectacular ceremony, but a deeper understanding of how traditions could bridge cultures and connect human beings across time and space. The changing of the guard had become more than a ceremony. It had become a symbol of how the past and future could work together to create something beautiful. 5 years had passed since James Mitchell first stood before Queen Camilla in that quiet palace sitting room, and the world had changed in ways none of them could have imagined. The enhanced changing of the guard ceremony had become the most visited cultural experience in Europe, attracting over 20 million visitors annually and inspiring similar projects in over 60 countries worldwide. James now held the title of Global Director of Cultural Innovation, overseeing a network of heritage sites that used technology to deepen rather than diminish traditional experiences. His office overlooked the same courtyard where he had once stood motionless for hours, but his view now encompassed a much larger world. The morning's agenda included a video conference with project leaders from 5 continents. The Forbidden City in Beijing had successfully implemented audio enhancement for their ceremonial displays. The Palace of Versailles was preparing to launch their own version of the Guardian Chronicles system. Most significantly, UNESCO had adopted the London Protocol as their official framework for cultural site enhancement worldwide. But today held special significance beyond the usual international coordination. King Charles III had requested a private meeting to discuss the next phase of the project, one that would extend far beyond the changing of the guard ceremony itself. The transformation of the palace had been remarkable. What had once been a fortress of tradition now hummed with quiet innovation. Visitors moved through enhanced experiences that brought centuries of history to life, while preserving every element that made the monarchy special. The technology had become so sophisticated and seamlessly integrated that most people forgot it was there at all. James arrived at the king's private study to find a room that perfectly embodied the project's philosophy. Ancient portraits lined walls that concealed cutting-edge environmental controls. Priceless antique furniture sat alongside holographic displays that could summon any document from the royal archives. The past and future coexisted in perfect harmony. "James, my boy," the king greeted him warmly. "Come in and tell me about your latest adventures in preserving our world's cultural treasures." Over tea served in china that had been used by monarchs for 2 centuries, James briefed the king on recent developments. The success stories were remarkable. Traditional festivals in Peru that had been dying out were now thriving thanks to enhanced visitor experiences. Ancient temples in Cambodia were generating sustainable tourism revenue while being perfectly preserved. Aboriginal cultural sites in Australia were sharing their stories with the world while maintaining sacred protection. But what excites me most, Your Majesty, is how the technology has strengthened rather than weakened cultural connections, James explained. Young people who experience enhanced ceremonies are more likely to learn about their own cultural heritage. The global has reinforced the local. The king nodded thoughtfully. That brings me to why I wanted to see you today. The Queen and I have been discussing the next challenge, one that goes beyond individual ceremonies or sites. He stood and walked to a window overlooking the palace gardens, where tourists from dozens of countries were exploring exhibits that told the story of the monarchy's evolution over a millennium. We want to create a global cultural exchange network, the king continued. A system that connects enhanced heritage experiences worldwide, allowing people to understand not just their own traditions but how those traditions relate to others around the globe. James felt his pulse quicken as the king described his vision. Imagine a visitor experiencing the enhanced changing of the guard ceremony while simultaneously learning about ceremonial traditions in Japan, Nigeria, or Mexico. Picture families in rural villages connecting with cultural sites on other continents, sharing stories and discovering common human values across vast distances. The technology exists, James realized aloud. The network infrastructure is already in place at most enhanced sites. We could create cultural bridges that span the entire planet. The project would be the most ambitious cultural undertaking in human history. It would require cooperation from governments, cultural institutions, and technology companies across 6 continents. But the potential impact was staggering. A world where cultural differences strengthened rather than divided, where heritage preservation became a shared global responsibility. Dr. Hartwell joined them for the second half of the meeting, bringing preliminary research that supported the king's vision. Studies showed that people who experienced multiple cultural traditions through enhanced technology developed greater empathy, tolerance, and global awareness. The technology that had saved individual ceremonies could potentially transform how humanity understood itself. We're talking about creating digital cultural embassies, Dr. Hartwell explained, places where anyone, anywhere, can experience the living traditions of cultures around the world. Not as entertainment, but as bridges to understanding. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, ranging from technical challenges to diplomatic considerations. The project would require unprecedented international cooperation, but the success of the enhanced changing of the guard had proven that such cooperation was possible. As the meeting concluded, James found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A working-class soldier from Yorkshire was now being asked to help reshape how humanity preserved and shared its cultural heritage. The boy who had dreamed of wearing a red tunic had become someone tasked with connecting the world's cultures. "There's one more thing," the king said as James prepared to leave. "We want you to know that we're creating a new order of knighthood specifically for cultural innovation. You'll be the first recipient, Sir James, if you'll accept the honor." James felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the recognition. From standing guard outside the palace to being knighted within its walls represented a transformation he could never have imagined. "Your Majesty, I'm honored beyond words," he managed to say. "But I hope you'll understand that this achievement belongs to everyone who believed that tradition and innovation could work together." 3 months later, James stood in the same courtyard where his journey had begun, but now he wore civilian clothes and carried the responsibilities of knighthood. The ceremony taking place before him looked identical to the ones he had performed years earlier, but its impact had expanded to encompass the globe. In real time, millions of people around the world were experiencing not just the changing of the guard, but connected ceremonies and traditions from their own cultures. A child in São Paulo was learning about British military tradition while discovering the ceremonial dances of her Brazilian ancestors. A family in Mumbai was experiencing the pageantry of Buckingham Palace while exploring the rich ceremonial traditions of their own heritage. The Global Cultural Exchange Network had launched successfully, connecting enhanced heritage sites across 73 countries. Cultural preservation had become a shared human endeavor rather than isolated national efforts. The technology that had begun with a single ceremony had evolved into a worldwide celebration of human diversity and creativity. Sarah Chen, now documenting cultural innovation projects globally, captured the moment when children from 12 different countries simultaneously experienced the enhanced ceremony through virtual reality connections. Their faces, glowing with wonder and understanding, told the story of a world learning to see itself as one human family with countless beautiful traditions. As the ceremony concluded, James reflected on the words Queen Camilla had spoken 5 years earlier. The world is changing and the monarchy must change with it. But we must never lose sight of what makes us special. They had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. The changing of the guard remained exactly what it had always been, a magnificent display of British military tradition and royal pageantry. But it had also become something new, a gateway to understanding the entire sweep of human cultural achievement. The tourists dispersing from the courtyard carried with them not just memories of a spectacular ceremony, but connections to cultural traditions around the world. They had experienced the particular British military precision and royal grandeur, but they had also touched the universal, humanity's endless capacity for creating beauty, meaning and connection across time and space. James walked slowly through the palace gates, past the guards who now stood in the positions he had once occupied. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the global cultural exchange network expanded, to include more sites, more traditions, and more opportunities for human understanding. But tonight, he simply marveled at what had been accomplished. A centuries-old ceremony had become a beacon for the future. Tradition had embraced innovation without losing its soul, and somewhere in the intricate dance between past and future, humanity had discovered new ways to celebrate both its diversity and its fundamental unity. The changing of the guard would continue, as it had for over 350 years. But now it carried with it the hopes and dreams of a world learning to see itself more clearly, to preserve its treasures more carefully, and to share its stories more generously. The ceremony had changed everything by changing nothing at all.